Hi guys, it's Trevor Tolliver here and you're listening to the Blue Day podcast.
Fellow Chelsea supporters, welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. Yes, folks, this is the Blue Day podcast, and I am your host, Keith Lawrence. We are welcoming back two Chelsea supporters who eat, sleep, breathe Chelsea, and of course, they have a top podcast as well called The Blueprint, which is setting the podcast world by storm. Here is Ceri Levy and Garry Hayes. Gentlemen, welcome back. Last time you both were on the show, we was talking about the introduction of the Blueprint. Since it's come out and a lot of people have provided some great feedback, how have you found the response from supporters and people within Chelsea about the show?
Well, firstly, Keith, what have you made of it?
I like that. Turn the tables.
I do interviews. I don't be interviewed.
He's battered up, isn't he? He's battered up. He's going for it. He's going for the home run. Right. I have listened to all the recent ones. I actually listened to the Harding ones more than once because all of them I found insightful. I found it a complete wellwood sort of way of listening to certain individuals that you would never expect to listen from and discuss about the Chelsea history, and just not just talking about from the players' perspective, but people behind the scenes and people I know that would love to hear about people from behind the scenes talking about Chelsea, not just necessarily the bad times, but also the good times, and talking about individuals. So when you had people discuss when Ruud Gullit turned up and what Glenn Hoddle did to try and convince Ruud Gullit to sign for Chelsea, those sort of little snippets you don't normally get, and that's why I find, obviously, with this particular podcast, just superb in terms of just finding the right information and just basically just putting the truth out there. Because a lot of people have certain rumors about, they've heard certain rumors and they hear certain things, but you guys have put out the facts, and you guys have put out people that are willing to tell their side of the story, not just for clicks and for, to get attention, but just to put their stories across, which I found great.
And that is how you answer a question, Kerry. I love that.
That's
I
brilliant,
love
isn't
it, Keith.
Right, we don't even need to be on here anymore. No, and Keith Lawrence is not paid by the Blueprint to actually say this stuff.
Not yet. Not yet.
Few more good words. So what was your question, Keith? What have we made of it? It's been absolutely
the feedback, feedback from your peers, feedback from people within Chelsea, because I know that obviously there was a few people that you've interviewed in detail, and obviously we'll discuss about certain individuals, but obviously those that perhaps you maybe wanted to interview but may have responded to you and said, I've just listened to this, bloody hell guys, this is great. Feedback from peers.
It's been incredible. It's been I've been surprised. Obviously Kerry and I know what we're doing and we talk about it all the time, and we're still just finishing off some episodes at the moment for the latter part of the series, but you want a response, you want a good response, but you can't expect one, right? And the response we've had from everyone's just been incredible. I think everyone's responded to it in the way that we were hoping they would. And players that have been in it, executives that have been in it, have all messaged to say that they really like it. I had a few people DM me on social media, former players and stuff, saying, "Oh mate, you didn't tell me this was out and I've listened to it and it's great." And I was like, "Oh yeah, sorry, it's out now. I forgot to tell you." And then just at the weekend, Tori Andre Flo messaged me. I was in the theatre and he messaged me and he said, my season started well. We're third in the table because he's coaching in the second division of Norway.
That's right.
I've got a few days off, so I'm gonna binge the Blueprint now. And I was like, "Oh, amazing!" So it's been incredible, hasn't it, Kerry?
Yeah, I mean the thing is, you can't take too much notice. Look, you want everyone to be happy, and you take note of what people say about things. But when you're in the middle of it, it's not over for us. Every day we're working on the stories, working on the episodes. We're actually in real time edit wise at the moment. So the pressure's on until the series is over, really. And so you can't go, wow, this is amazing, because you got the next one to do and the next one to do and the next one. Yeah, okay, in a few weeks that'll be over. But it's also, what's interesting is there have been a few people that have been trying to get, who are coming out of the woodwork now, and we're getting an opportunity to do interviews. Can't reveal too much in case they don't happen, but that also comes from the fact that the series is going well. People are talking about it, people know about it, and sometimes that makes people attainable, and so it's constantly going on. So yes, we do take notice of all the positive things that are being said, but don't take too much notice of it, other than feel really quite humble with some of the lovely things people have said. But just that's got to drive us on to keep on making the next episode as good. The next episode is good.
And here's some breaking news for you, Keith. This week, we are having a mid-season break because we don't have time to put these new interviews that we're getting into the next episode because they've just happened. So, because it's like Kerry was saying, it's live, right? As in, we're working live trying to get stuff done, which is, all the interviews are done, but then there are a few people we couldn't get hold of that have now said, no, yeah, I'm going to do this. So we're like, okay, we'll delay putting this episode out so we can have you in it. So there's a delay this week, but next week we'll be back to normal broadcast next Wednesday, which is episode 4. And now the wait is over. How funny is that as well? Now I'm saying it, Kerry, it's funny because then it's like episode 4 is the delayed episode, which is fitting for the title. The wait is over. It's here.
Except it isn't. For those of you that want to know why the wait isn't over, it's because it's not over. But yeah.
I was just going to say, you discussed about certain individuals, obviously not wanting you to admit who could be on the show, but what's the story? What for the upcoming episode? What's the sort of outline story? What's the background to it? What significant period in Chelsea's history will this involve?
So for anyone who hasn't listened, I'll bring you up to speed real quick on the series now. So we launched in March with the Ken Bates tapes, which was the double header with Ken. And then we subsequently released in mid-May the Matthew Harding tapes. They were just straight interviews. So it was a straight interview with Ken, 2 episodes. And then it was an interview with Matthew Harding's lawyer and friend, David Cooper, and also the executor of Matthew Harding's will, a chap called Mark Killick. So we released them in May, but they were just straight interviews. And now we're into the full swing of the narrative series. So this is where, for me, it gets exciting and interesting even more so. Not that the other interviews aren't good, but this is where we bring all the voices together and Kerry narrates it and we tell that Chelsea story. So we started off with the pivot point in modern Chelsea's history from the start of the Premier League, which is, in our view, the Barcelona game in 2005 when Chelsea were labelled the enemies of football. So we started off there, then we bring it back to episode 2, the Hand of Hod, and basically pay homage to what Glenn Hoddle did for Chelsea. Then from there, we start running a more linear narrative. So we flow over into the Rude Awakening, as we've called it.
Andre flow over.
Yes, there you go. But that's a little bit too early because he hasn't signed yet in our story, because you're confusing people now. So the episode that's just dropped last week was all about Ruud Gullit coming in and then how Chelsea, because key to this as well, we're not just reliving a story with Chelsea, we're trying to put Chelsea into context, right? So what's really interesting is how Chelsea put their faith in this young manager in Hoddle, and then they start rebuilding the club for a couple of years, and then the Bosman ruling comes in, and Chelsea are the first British club to really manipulate it and start bringing in overseas players. Overseas players were trickling into the Premier League, but then Chelsea are the first team to do it en masse, and then subsequent to that in 2000, I think it's Boxing Day 2000, Chelsea were the first team to field an entire starting 11 that wasn't, didn't have an Englishman in it. So where we've got up to now the episode that will come next week is episode 4, and now the wait is over, which is a quote from the song Blue Day, which is right at the very end. This is all about Chelsea starting to win things. So we told the story of why Chelsea are important in modern football, the pivot point. Then we bring it back, Hoddle, Hullet. Then they start winning stuff, and then we take it for the next 4 episodes after that, right up to 2012. So that's what you'll be getting next week, with key insight from key people.
And I'll tell you what's interesting is what I love about these episodes is how it's really made people think about Glenn Hoddle as a Chelsea manager again, and go, oh yeah, for people who were there going, oh, I've forgotten about this. It's great to relive this. Oh, I didn't know that was happening, or I didn't know this was happening. And for younger listeners, of course, going, oh, right, okay, that's where it all came from. Because, for a lot of people, Glenn Hoddle's the bloke on BT Sport. Oops, that doesn't exist in about an hour's time or whatever. It's going to become TNT, mate, which sounds Australian, but maybe it isn't. I think it's actually American. But
it's American, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. But the very interesting thing is also, I read, my job often is to read the autobiographies of the people before we meet them, to talk to them. And I read Glenn Hoddle's autobiography, and I was absolutely shocked. And Garry and I talked about it, about how a few pages of his autobiography are actually committed to his Chelsea story. And I don't know whether that's because he's such a Tottenham legend, inverted commas, did way more at Chelsea than anywhere else, that actually he decided to leave it out. I don't know. Knowing that mainly it would be Tottenham fans buying it, I don't know. But he really covers it only in surface detail. And I think what we've tried to do, and hopefully we've successfully done it, is that we've actually put his star back in the right place. Because without him, we wouldn't be where we were, I won't say now, because we're not in a very good place at this moment in time. But he really did set the foundations for the way that we ended up playing, and the fact that we ended up winning things. And I think that's been fascinating, because when we interviewed Hoddle, it was very much like a lot of it that he was talking about to us was the very first time that he'd talked about it, certainly publicly. And I think that gives amazing insight, because there is nothing you can do repeats with people and they'll tell you the same story 4 or 5 times. The 5th time may be told well, but we won't be told with the same emotion. And I think that's what we got out of Glenn, is that he gave us it all, chapter and verse, of what his time at Chelsea was like.
Well, it's funny because it was on a day very much like today, where it was very hot, wasn't it, when we did it? But his agent was sat there in the room, and when we finished, he just came over and shook our hands and went, I love that, guys. I've never heard Glenn talk about Chelsea like this. And we're like, oh,
and he
great.
was a Chelsea fan as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. He weren't Glenn's direct agent. It was someone who works with Terry, who's his agent, who was looking after him for the day. But yeah, it's a good episode, isn't it? It's a good period of Chelsea that I think we've obviously we can't be the judge of it. We leave fans to be the judge of it and people that listen to it. But we've tried to really put that period into context for how it really started getting Chelsea moving.
And do you think because of this episode, this upcoming one about Glenn, and even the previous one about when he brought in Ruud Gullit, do you think, as you said, fans or younger fans, or the ones that just think of him with Tottenham or BT Sport, will start appreciating him more? And do you think there'll be some of the elder gentlemen who have been following Chelsea for decades would actually start looking at Glenn Hoddle in a different light now, because of episodes like what you're bringing out, and stories that are being told, not just by Glenn, but by other players that only signed for the club because it's Glenn Hoddle, not because they wanted to play in blue, not because it was in London, but because of Glenn Hoddle. Yeah,
and it is. I would like to think that people do listen to it and then understand, because that's why we're doing this series. Really, is because we just always thought that we know Chelsea, right? It's innate in all of us, and we're doing this. We are fans, but we're doing it professionally. But it's a compelling story that we sort of have lived, so we know it, but no one's really documented it to the degree that we are. So hopefully people do hear it and just think, yeah, this Glenn Hoddle guy did a lot for Chelsea. Now, Glenn didn't win anything with Chelsea. Glenn came in 93 and left 3 years later in 96. But just as Glenn leaves, Chelsea start winning things. That's not a coincidence. That's not because he couldn't make us win things. But what Glenn did was, and this is what we go into in these 3 episodes. Obviously, the episode 4 has got a little bit less of Glenn in it, but episode 2 and 3, The Hand of Hod and Rude Awakening, are essentially about Glenn Hoddle and Ruud Gullit. But what Glenn did is he came in, he modernised Chelsea, doing stuff that now is just standard. That if you went to a football club and they didn't have this, it would be complained about, and it would be you would be seen to be completely laughable. Just stuff such as having chefs at the training ground and dietitians and whatnot. But then he started changing the way Chelsea played football. He started signing a different caliber of player. He had a vision with Colin Hutchinson, who is an unsung hero of Chelsea's past, who was influential as managing director in bringing about a change. And they needed the support of Matthew Harden and Ken Bates from a financial perspective. But the vision was very much Glenn and Colin's. So it's important people understand that, and they understand the humble beginnings the club had in the Premier League, because without Glenn Hoddle coming in, if we had 2 options that summer in 93, do we keep Dave Webb, that's just kept Chelsea up after replacing Ian Porterfield, or do we take a risk on this young up-and-coming manager who's had a good season in the Championship or League? Well, what was it then? It was Division 1, wasn't it? And they took a risk, and that risk paid off. But what Glenn did is he bought this new style of football. He started bringing a higher caliber of player. He got us into the FA Cup final in his first season. Granted, we lost 4-0, and there's a whole host of issues we can talk around, regarding that loss. But he got us to a cup final. That resulted in us being in Europe. And it just starts snowballing, right? Then Ruud becomes manager, and then Vialli comes, and the Bosman ruling keeps serving Chelsea, and you see this, and now I'm starting to read my scripts to you, because this is what it's all about, and it's just gathering momentum.
And then finally, we made a series about it.
Yeah.
Well, a successful series as well. In terms of when I talk about
so far,
but it seems as if it's going to gather a lot more pace with upcoming episodes, and more untold stories, and more sort of crazy situations, and even some shocks along the way. But when you look back at with Glenn's way of how he handled it at Chelsea, and there's been obviously the BT documentary about what Glenn had to put up with at Chelsea, with the phone that he had to keep putting money in, or the phone wouldn't work, or the washing machine wouldn't work, and things of that nature. He signs Ruud Gullit, who a few years before that was World Player of the Year. Do you believe Chelsea since then has made such a significant signing like Ruud Gullit when he joined back in 95?
I think that's a really interesting question, actually, because we've made great signings, so many great signings over the years. But for the time and for where we were and what we were trying to achieve, maybe Gullit was the most sparkling and the most unexpected signing of all. I think it's a really interesting question. I don't think, because we've never gone back to the level, well, maybe we are at the moment, but we've never gone back to the level we were at when, you had Hoddle keeping Gullit away from the ground, keeping him away from the training ground, just keeping him away from anything Chelsea other than the pubs down the King's Road. I think I don't know how Gary feels about this, but for me, no, I don't think we've ever been able to match it, because we've become bigger and grown stronger as a club continually since those days. So, yeah, I can't see that there's been anyone that probably comes close. What do you think, Gary?
Frank Lampard.
Yeah, but that's different.
But this is what I was going to say, and this is in a script I've been working on is that Hullet is the most important Chelsea signing in the modern history from a brand perspective. Because without Hullet, you don't get Vialli and others, right? It's so important because that puts Chelsea on the map and it sets people, like people say in that episode, like, wow, Chelsea were signing players like him. Everyone was sitting up going, why couldn't we get Hullet? Why didn't we go for Hullet? And that changed the perception of Chelsea. So you've got that on the brand perspective. But then on the playing side of it, the most important signing is Frank Lampard.
Yeah,
in my eye.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, but I was talking from the angle of personality, size of player already.
Yeah, sure. No, yeah. And there isn't one that compares with that. But that's what I'm saying is that you've got two ways of looking at it. When you look at the brand and Chelsea as an establishment and as a club and what they're trying to achieve, because as Glenn always said, look, we can achieve this stuff, but we need to achieve it with better players. And you don't do that without signing Hullet, because then Hullet was there as, we weren't signing Hullet. They signed him as part, and this is something we talk about in the series in the latter episodes, is that Chelsea had a 5-year plan when they signed Ruud Hullet, and this isn't spoken about a lot, but Chelsea had a 5-year plan that they put into place in 1995, and in 2000 they achieved it by getting Champions League football, and then that led to the season later getting Frank Lampard. But what Frank Lampard is so important for is because then he sets it up. Because then they're bringing John Terry through and they're growing something different, because this is what Colin Hutchinson talks about, is that I said to him, and we say it about, and this is in the next episode coming up, about the reasons why they sacked Ruud Hullet, then the reasons why they sacked Vialli and brought Ranieri in. And it all starts coming together and you start seeing it when you remove the emotion. And obviously you look back in retrospect and you see the plan and how it's coming together and why certain decisions were made. And then what happens is Frank Lampard comes in, and Chelsea, as their blood in John Terry, their spine of what Chelsea became were the 1 and 2, John Terry and Frank Lampard, right? And they built other stuff around it when Roman came in, but those were the mainstays, right? They are the crossover players from the pre-Roman era right up until when Chelsea won the Champions League. That's why Lampard is so important, because they needed that player who was going to do it alongside John Terry, because that was always the plan, and they did it.
And what's interesting as well, I would agree with you. Frank Lampard is the most important player we've ever had, I think, for all the reasons you're saying. But what's interesting is how it was seen that actually we were the club who, as you mentioned earlier, only a matter of a short time before had played a totally non-English 11. And then suddenly under Ranieri, you're going with a team that is considered to be essential to have an English spine, and getting players alongside JT and Frank. And you're absolutely right. Without those two, there would have been a real problem for Chelsea, I think, because they defined the spirit of the club through such a great period of Chelsea history.
Because that was the brief to Ranieri when he came in. They said, Frank Leboeuf, we like Frank Leboeuf, he's a good player, but the future of this club is that number 26 over there. You need to blood him, and we want to see him come through. So he did it. And he brought him through, and they needed someone else. I'm not saying they needed an Englishman or whatever, but they needed someone to be further ahead of him to give something. And they identified Frank Lampard as that man, and they signed Chelsea's greatest ever player, in my view. I don't think in my time of watching Chelsea, I've never seen a better player wear a Chelsea shirt. There might have been more skillful players like Eden Hazard and Zola and stuff, but as the embodiment of what Chelsea have been in the modern era, you look no further than Frank Lampard. So to go back to what the original question was, is has there been a more important signing than Ruud Hullet from a brand perspective and from elevating Chelsea to somewhere that they had never been in the modern era? No, there hasn't. But then from a footballing perspective, yes, there has, because that was Frank Lampard.
Well, basically, without Ruud Hullet, you don't get Frank Lampard, in a strange kind of twisted way. It's so actually one feeds the other. So yeah, I would also absolutely 100% support the idea that Frank Lampard is Chelsea's greatest ever player, without a doubt. Absolutely, 100%. We love him. Thank God he's no longer managing, and we can just love him for being Frank. I don't like having Frank around copying it from everybody. Frank's a
Couldn't copy
legend.
from me.
Oh, yeah, you say that. Secretly, he was saying, gosh, he's not very good. That's what he said. I'm sure I heard Garry say that once.
He copped it from a lot of people, to be honest, especially in the home games. There was a lot of people who were like, what? There was actually a few which I was stunned with, even because we're there with Brighton home and Brentford at home. I was using a friend of mine's season ticket in the East Upper, and people around there were going, we would rather have kept Potter. So,
well, with hindsight, we all would have. I would have thought, not because Frank did a dreadful job, just because things had got to rock bottom. You might as well stay there. Actually, if Potter had stayed, there wouldn't have been much difference in points anyway. So, we weren't going down. So, yeah, it just seemed like the wrong kind of reaction at the wrong kind of time. If they were going to do it, they should have done it earlier. But Garry and I always talk about the fact that really he needed at least the whole season and probably through till October of next season to really understand where he was. Maybe it was just too much for him. We don't know the ins and outs of how it was every day at the ground and at the club. So who knows? It's just what happens.
With this horrible season now behind us, and we're going to look forward to the new up and coming season. It was shite. With this new season, with the new season upcoming and the last one finally sort of in our rearview mirror, has it given you two the juices to perhaps maybe do its own series talking about last season when we started with Tuchel, we got the 1-0 win at Goodison Park, and see everything seemed to be a little bit okay, and then fast forward 9 months and the amount of, pardon me French, shit that went with it. Was there sort of giving you a little bit of juices to say, this could, rather than be its own episode, this could probably be our own series?
Well, we've got 10 years, right? We've got 10 years between where our story ends and then where we can go next, because this story for the Blueprint now ends in 2012. Spoiler alert, when Chelsea won the Champions League for the first time.
Did we? Oh, yeah.
So that's where the story ends. But to be honest, we haven't given it much thought really, because we're just so engrossed with this and obviously enjoying this. And but yeah, it certainly opens it up, right? We just won't take so long to do the next one.
Well, I was going to say, you talk about with this fantastic journey that you guys have been on, and it's taken you many, many years to get these interviews and to conduct the interviews and put a plan in place about when to put them on and the structure of it. As you say, it ended in 2012. Even as you said, 10 years, 2012 to 2022. So much to cover. One particular person maybe to cover is the return of the special one at Chelsea. That would be something to be interested to talk about, and obviously the other bits in between. And as you said, the second Champions League victory as well in 2021.
Yeah, because so the thing is for people.
Sorry, that was thunder my end here. If you heard that,
I thought you were just passing wind.
No, well, I thought you might think that. No, that was big thunder. Blimey!
Wow.
That might have been UEFA and Man City thinking about, well, hang on, Man City's going to win it now for the next 4 or 5 years, according to BT/TNT Sport.
That won't happen, but if it does, someone needs to make a series about it. But yeah, it's because for people that might not know the story, that are listening or watching this on YouTube or whatever, putting this together has taken us a long time, but obviously the chat it took 8 years. It hasn't been 8 years of solid graft. It's probably been, what would you say, Kerry, 18 months to 24 months solid graft probably in that time, because we started it, then we got busy, then we went back to it, because we're completely independent. We're not, this is self-financed. We're not part of a big organization or something. So we've done it on the fly, and then obviously the challenges of a pandemic for 2.5 years, that sort of brings it down to 5.5 years, right? Because it was almost impossible to interview anyone. And because we've been adamant we want to do it where it's studio quality, it's broadcast quality content, we could have, just done it on people's computer laptops, on their laptop mics and stuff. But we didn't want to do that. We wanted to, pay respect to the production, and the story that we're trying to tell. So we had to wait and be patient. So we just kept at it. But if we were to do a second series, then the good thing is what you always find with these things is that when you're selling the concept to people, they don't quite understand it because it doesn't exist. So once it exists and they see it, they're like, oh, that's it. Yeah, that's it. The thing I've been telling you about, look, it's number one in the chart at the moment. Oh, right. Yeah, I'll do it then. Which is why we got ourselves into this position now where we're delaying an episode a week to put some more voices in it. Yeah, so if we were to do series 2, I should imagine it'll come out a lot quicker than series 1 has.
Well, that'll be good because, again, when you look at certain events that took place, even when Benitez took over from Di Matteo in 2012, even that type of reaction, I'll never forget when first game after that, Chelsea versus Man City, the atmosphere when Benitez came out of that tunnel has not been like it since and wasn't like it even before. And that type of thing, when you talk about it from Benitez's point, or when you talk about it from players' point or people behind the scenes, what was their reaction? Little snippets like that, I think people would love to hear from.
Yeah, and what's interesting with that, Keith, there with Benitez as well, is that I think that because it's been a tough season this year, I think that fans have this revisionist perspective of Roman Abramovich. I'm not criticising Roman Abramovich needlessly here, but he is the man that did so much good for Chelsea, but he made mistakes, He brought in Rafa Benitez for Di Matteo. Now, that's not to say Di Matteo didn't deserve to be sacked and whatnot, but to replace a Chelsea legend with Rafa Benitez, the guy who had been so anti-Chelsea throughout his time at Liverpool, that was just a massive faux pas on the ownership's perspective. So that's why, to bring it right up to date now, just as an opinion, but I look at the new owners and I just think, look, they've got some stuff wrong, but they've got some stuff right as well, and it's their first year, but they've inherited a lot of problems at Chelsea. They inherited a club without any structure. And, the frustrating thing is here, you were talking about Man City just there. The frustrating thing is what Man City are doing now. They're doing it because Chelsea did it before them, but now they're doing it better. Yeah. And it pains me to say it, but they're doing it better. And why are they doing it better? Because they put structure in place, because they knew they couldn't just bounce. They were bouncing like Chelsea. They were bringing in Mark Hughes and then changing him for Mancini, then changing Mancini for Pellegrini. And did seem a little bit not as erratic as Chelsea. Yeah. But then what they did is they brought in the people behind the scenes and Guardiola's like, I'll come to you when I'm ready, but build it for me first. And that's what he wasn't getting at Chelsea. And all the time that Abramovich was courting him and flirting with him, he was never going to come to Chelsea, not because it was Chelsea or whatever, but he knew in order to operate the way he needs to operate and the way he likes to operate and wants to operate is that he needed that structure, because you can't perform the way his teams do without that structure. And they've got it, and that's how they can sustain it.
And can you imagine, actually, if he had come to Chelsea and had the first year or so that he had with City at Chelsea, he may not have lasted longer than that. City decided, okay, we've gone for it. We've got him. We're going to keep him. We're going to work with it. And look what's happened. They've grown and grown. So
because Chelsea built the club around the dressing room, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is with a dressing room is that, well, I guess it's like managers as well. It has a shelf life, right? But structure, this is something I talk about all the time. Structure and culture is what, that is the cement that binds the club, right? That is what keeps you going. That when things are going wrong or whatever, you got the culture and the structure to get you through it. Chelsea had that to a lesser degree with, this is why I don't buy into this idea of chaos and trophies is what Chelsea do, because it's not easy, because you can see Scolari failed and others failed, but it was easier 15 years ago to just come in at Chelsea and go, yep, right, now let's go and win something. Because they had Cech in goal, Ashley Cole left back, John Terry centre back, Frank Lampard in the middle with Essien, and Didier Drogba up front. Then they just sprinkled some fairy dust around it to give it a little bit more magic. But that's what kept it all together, right? Guardiola didn't want that at City. He wanted something more solid that was built around him. Because the problem City have got is when he leaves, maybe that all goes with him. And the problem Chelsea had is that when that generation came to an end, that went with them and they never replaced it. And that's why we think it's important that the story ends in 2012 as well, because everything was building to that moment. But the problem is Chelsea didn't look beyond it. And they tried to sign players like Hazard and that to bring it about, but they could never sustain it in the way they did from 2004 right up to 2012, right? You look at the way the trophies have fallen off. I know we've won another Champions League and we've won a couple of league titles, but it's not the same.
And also the whole thing is that at City, you look, the classic thing Guardiola has done, it's what Ferguson used to do. He would get rid of players. You'd go, God, I can't believe he's getting rid of him. You can look at the long list that both of them did.
Jaap Stam, David Beckham.
Absolutely, and then you've got David Silva, all these other players that he just went, no, right, you can move on. And Chelsea didn't do that. A lot of the players that we had got long in the tooth at Chelsea. And you'd see that year where suddenly they weren't up to it anymore. They didn't have the pace. They didn't have the same sort of desire or passion.
This
and
season
that's
just gone.
Exactly. Absolutely.
In terms of the blueprint itself, I know you don't want to give too much away in terms of individuals that are going to be on the show, but whoever they are, I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. What sort of other stories coming up could you tell us in terms of timelines from certain periods of Chelsea's history that will be covered on future episodes of the Blueprint?
Yeah, so we're not doing the important thing we want to stress as well is we're not doing a blow by God, I can't even speak.
Blow by blow.
There you go, a blow by blow account of this 20-year window. What we are doing though is we're looking at the inflection points. Mm-hmm. So like I was saying, we start off with the first episode, Enemies of Football. That's when it turns for modern Chelsea. That's when you're like, oh, okay, they're doing it at home. Now they're doing it in Europe, right? Against the Giants. Then you've got Hoddle. Then you've got Hullet. Then Chelsea start winning things. But then after Chelsea win things, we bring it right up to 2003. So we sort of skip over a few bits because the important bit is Chelsea were winning things and they start competing, but then at what cost are they competing? And then that's where it comes into it. Were they going to go bust? Ken Bates says they weren't. Other people say they were. We've spoken to players that are telling us they weren't getting their salaries. So there's a lot to take into there. And then it's the same when Roman comes in. But when Roman comes in, we've got 3 episodes on that. So the next episode is Now the Wait Is Over. Then it's Champions League or Bust, which is episode 5. Then so really in this 20 years, a lot of people will probably look at it and think, yeah, it's all about the Roman stuff. But we got 5 episodes building up to when Roman comes in because it's so important. Then we do the birth of the Roman Empire. Then we do the special ones because then we talk the birth of the Roman Empire is just all about that summer. It's not about the whole story. It's just what happened in that summer, taking you behind the scenes.
20 years ago this year as well.
Exactly. Taking you in the room.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Taking you in the room with Roman Abramovich on how the club was bought. So it's almost like you're sat next to him and you can hear him breathe as he's buying the club. And then the special ones, Jose coming in. Then we skittle over everything else to get to the Champions League. Not because that stuff's not important, but if we're just going, and then Chelsea did this, and then Chelsea did that, and then they did this, I just find that boring. It's like, no, look, where do we get deep in this? Where is the meat on the bone? And the meat are these 8 episodes, these 8 inflection points.
Well, I think it's going to be fascinating to see what transpires within the next episodes. And again, the episodes that you've had on, especially with talking about Matthew Harding, Ken Bates, who I've met for the first time at the 83-84 reunion. Unbelievable wit for someone of his age, and for me, he stole the show with the way he was. It was absolutely fantastic. Those episodes I highly recommend. Anybody that loves Chelsea's history, that values it, give that a listen, because you will learn so much from those episodes. Absolutely incredible. And it was great, obviously, when you last came on the show, talking about how you got the interview and the day of the interviews with speaking to Ken. Last question on me in terms of the blueprint as well. We've obviously discussed about the present, but in terms of the future, with what you're looking to cover as well, is there anything in particular that, if you want to save it for a rainy day, what type of topics or individuals are you looking to maybe keep to one side and go, yeah, we'll do that on another day?
That's a tough one. What you mean in the actual series we're doing right now?
No, so say, well, both. Maybe in terms of this particular series, or if you was looking to do maybe a extra series, what sort of bits would you look to perhaps do?
Well, what we are going to do, Keith, is
just going to tell them that.
Oh, go on, you do it.
All right. Yeah, what we are going to do is, in principle, we're looking to release a lot of the interviews in their entirety, so people can actually hear, because a lot of these interviews, we got 2 hours with some of these people. We got 2 hours with Roberto Di Matteo. We got 2 hours with Nigel Spackman. We got 2 hours with Steve Clark. We got over an hour with Glenn Hodler. I mean, it goes on and on.
We've got 3 hours with Eddie Newton. We've got
it's just
2 hours with Colin Hutchinson.
It's just relentless in Chelsea information, and all we're doing is pulling out some bits. I wouldn't even dare say pulling out the best bits. I'd say only pulling out some bits that fit into the instantaneous narrative that we're telling on each episode. And there's so much great information for anybody who loves football, not just Chelsea fans, that comes across in these interviews. So the idea is, once the series is finished, we will make them available one way or another for people to go and access them and learn about even further great moments in Chelsea history from voices who actually created that history. So that's really one of our biggest plans.
And just to add to what Kerry was saying there, Keith, because what it is that we could just very easily put up an entire episode of Colin Hutchinson to talk about how Chelsea manipulated Bosman and stuff, right? But we need to give other people their voice. So we do have to cut. And it's not because what he said isn't valid. It's just that you said enough. We need to let someone else come in and talk here to give another perspective, right? So we've got so much great content, so many great interviews, that it would be a shame for him just to have a lot of it on the cutting room floor. So what we will be doing is, like Kerry said, one way or another, we're going to launch the bonus episodes effectively, where people can come on the same feed, get all the extra stuff about the blueprint that, because like I said, it's not a blow by, I can't even say it. A blow
by blow.
This is why I'm not narrating it, Keith. Right?
Is that why?
I can write it, I can't say it. But it's
you've got talents elsewhere then.
Yeah, exactly. But
he hides his light under a bushel, as they say.
But it's just a lot of the interviews we did as well. We digressed with the guest, and we spoke about stuff that didn't have anything to do with the blueprint, but it's still golden Chelsea insight, which people will listen to, and they'll just hear more about the player or the personality, the executive or whoever. And there's some interviews that we just can't put in because we just haven't got the time, as in we don't want to make these we could make these episodes 4 hours long, but we don't want to. We want people to hear it and enjoy it on the commute or whatever. So we're aiming for 50-minute episodes, but we could make the episodes so long. So we will be releasing all the bonus content as well for people to come and get in one form or another.
Well, brilliant. And it'll be great, as you said, with these episodes that you've done and the episodes coming up, to really get the insight and the feedback you've got. I know from what I've seen on Twitter and what I've seen through people that, when I've gone to games too, and they say, oh, you know about the blueprint. Yeah, I know about the blueprint. And they talk to me about the stories that you've garnered and the moments in time that's caused Chelsea to become where they are today. And hopefully we can get through the shit season we've just seen and see the good times again. But gentlemen, listen, it's been a pleasure to have you back on the show. Hopefully our paths will cross again at some point in the near future. But I just wish to say thanks to you, Ceri, and you, Garry, for being on the show this afternoon.
Thanks for having us on again, Keith.